In the early 2000s, a man sat in his messy London flat, armed with a slow, screeching dial-up modem and a burning obsession. He wasn't a cyber terrorist. He wasn't a state-sponsored spy. He was a curious systems administrator on a quest for the truth. His mission? To find evidence of UFOs and secret free energy technology hidden by the US government. What he did next would be called the biggest military computer hack of all time by the Pentagon. For over a year, he slipped through the digital walls of NASA, the Army, and the Navy, leaving a trail of chaos in his wake. He was a ghost in their machine, a lone operator using the handle solo. Today, GENSHIFT is telling the unbelievable true story of Gary McKinnon, the man who hacked the Pentagon with a dial-up modem. This is a digital David and Goliath story, exploring the thin line between curiosity, activism, and cybercrime. Get ready to dive into a world of government secrets, one man's obsession, and a legal battle that tested the very definition of justice. Hit that subscribe button now to join us in decoding the technologies shaping our world. 1. The Quest for Truth, a conspiracy theory and a dial-up modem. To understand how a self-described, bumbling computer nerd from North London ended up in the crosshairs of the world's only superpower, you have to understand the world he lived in, both outside and inside his head. Gary McKinnon wasn't motivated by money, fame, or malice. His motivation was a story, a powerful narrative that promised to change the world. In May 2001, an organization called The Disclosure Project, founded by ufologist Stephen M. Greer, held a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. It was an unprecedented event. Over 20 retired military, intelligence, and government officials stood before the world's media and testified to the reality of UFOs and a government cover-up. For McKinnon, this wasn't just another conspiracy theory. He described these witnesses as very credible, relied-upon people. Their testimony provided what he saw as authoritative validation for his long-held beliefs, that the government was hiding revolutionary technologies, such as anti-gravity and zero-point energy, that could solve the world's problems. This event became the catalyst, transforming his private curiosity into what he later called a moral crusade. This crusade was enabled by a unique convergence of factors. First was the technological landscape of the early 2000s. This was the Wild West era of the internet, a time before robust, multi-layered cybersecurity was standard practice. Security was often an afterthought, a reality McKinnon would soon exploit. The second factor was his psychology. Years later, in 2008, McKinnon would be diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Experts noted this condition often involves obsessive, all-consuming interests and a degree of social naivety in judging the consequences of one's actions. During the period of the hacks, his mother, Janice Sharp, described him as isolating himself, not washing, and becoming completely consumed by his quest. A classic manifestation of this intense, singular focus. This wasn't a criminal mastermind meticulously planning an attack. It was a man with a unique neurotype, armed with a compelling ideological justification, and presented with an open digital door. He wasn't just solo by name. Investigators' logs would later reveal he was a relatively junior hacker, often asking others in chat rooms for basic information. He was just one actor in a parade of hackers from around the world who were exploiting the same weak US government gateways, but he was the one who got caught, and he was the one who would be made into an example. 2. Inside the Pentagon, the chaos and the clues. For 13 months, between February 2001 and March 2002, Gary McKinnon, alias Solo, went to work. From his bedroom, using a 56K modem that screeched its way online, his methods were shockingly simple. He used a basic port scanner to find US military and government computers running Windows. Then he searched for a vulnerability so basic it was almost insulting: administrator accounts that had been set up without a password. He found them again and again. It was the digital equivalent of walking down a street of high-security buildings and discovering that dozens of them had left the front door unlocked with a welcome mat outside. Once inside, he used off-the-shelf remote access software to explore the networks of NASA, the Pentagon, the Army, and the Navy. On one network alone, a single insecure computer image had been used to configure 10,000 machines, replicating the blank password flaw across the entire system. He was so astonished by the lack of security that he started leaving messages on system administrators' desktops. "Your security is crap." In this digital labyrinth, McKinnon believed he found the breadcrumbs he was looking for. He claimed to have discovered an Excel spreadsheet titled Non-Terrestrial Officers, containing a list of names and ranks that didn't correspond to any known military personnel. He said he found logs of material transfers between ships with vessel names that were not registered in any U.S. Navy database. His most dramatic claim was seeing a high-resolution photograph in a NASA folder at the Johnson Space Center. He described a perfect, seamless, cigar-shaped object hanging in space over the northern hemisphere. But as he tried to download the image over his slow dial-up connection, he noticed the cursor on the remote desktop moving on its own. An administrator on the other side of the Atlantic had spotted him and severed his connection. But there is another side to this story. The US government painted a picture not of a curious explorer, but of a reckless cyber vandal. They accused McKinnon of causing over $700,000 in damages. Their indictment alleged that he deleted critical operating system files, shutting down the entire U.S. Army's military district of Washington network, over 2,000 computers, for a full 24 hours. Most damningly, they claimed that shortly after the September 11th attacks, he hacked into the Earl Naval Weapons Station and deleted critical weapons logs, paralyzing the munitions supply for the entire U.S. Atlantic Fleet. The timing of these alleged actions was catastrophic. In a pre-9/11 world, McKinnon might have been seen as a nuisance. But in the hyper-vigilant, nationalistic atmosphere of late 2001, his intrusions were framed as a grave threat to national security. McKinnon has always denied causing intentional damage, arguing his goal was only to view and copy files. This is a classic case of unintentional consequences, where a person with a simple, non-malicious goal, operating in a complex system they don't fully understand, can trigger a cascade of devastating effects. The question that would define the next decade of his life was whether he should be judged on his intent or on the chaos he allegedly left behind. 3. The Longest Battle, a decade-long fight for freedom. On March 19, 2002, British police, acting on a request from the U.S., arrested Gary McKinnon. This was the opening salvo in a grueling legal war that would consume 10 years of his life. In November 2002, a U.S. federal grand jury indicted him on 7 counts of computer fraud and abuse. The threat was staggering. Each count carried a potential 10-year sentence, meaning McKinnon faced the possibility of up to 70 years in an American supermax prison. He openly feared being labeled an enemy combatant and sent to Guantanamo Bay. The legal mechanism for this was the UK-US Extradition Act of 2003, a controversial treaty rushed into law to fast-track terrorism suspects. Critics, including many British politicians, decried the treaty as lopsided, arguing it required the UK to hand over its citizens without the US needing to provide the same level of evidence that Britain had to provide in return. McKinnon became the human face of this perceived injustice. What followed was a relentless series of legal defeats. From the UK High Court to the House of Lords to the European Court of Human Rights, every appeal failed. With each ruling, the prospect of extradition grew more certain. But as the legal doors closed, the court of public opinion opened. The campaign to save Gary McKinnon, led by his indefatigable mother, Janice Sharp, transformed the case from a niche legal dispute into a national cause célèbre. She humanized her son, reframing him not as a cyber terrorist, but as a curious, vulnerable man being crushed by a vengeful superpower. The cause attracted an astonishing array of supporters. Rock stars like David Gilmour of Pink Floyd, Sting, and Bob Geldof lent their voices and platforms. Senior politicians, including the then leader of the opposition, David Cameron, and London's mayor, Boris Johnson, publicly called for the extradition to be stopped, arguing it lacked compassion. The turning point came in August 2008 with the formal diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. This wasn't just a new piece of information, it was a complete reframing of the entire narrative. The defense now had a powerful medical and humanitarian argument. Psychiatrists warned that McKinnon's combination of Asperger's and severe depression meant that if he were extradited, suicide was a near certainty. The central question of the case pivoted. It was no longer about the legality of hacking or the obligations of an international treaty. It became a question of basic human rights. Was it morally defensible to send a mentally vulnerable man to a foreign prison system where he was at high risk of taking his own life? For 4 more years, the battle raged. Finally, on October 16, 2012, the Home Secretary Theresa May stood before Parliament and did what many thought was impossible. Citing the overwhelming medical evidence, she announced she was blocking the extradition because it would be incompatible with Mr. McKinnon's human rights. It was an extraordinary moment. A government choosing to prioritize the life of one vulnerable citizen over its treaty obligations to its most powerful ally. 2 months later, the UK's Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, announced that no charges would be brought against McKinnon in Britain, citing the legal difficulties in mounting a case a decade later. After 10 years, the siege was over. 4. The legacy: hacking, privacy, and government secrets. The echoes of Gary McKinnon's case resonate powerfully today, especially for a generation that grew up in the shadow of Edward Snowden and Julian Assange. While their methods and specific goals were different, Snowden being an insider whistleblower, Assange a publisher, they all share a common thread. They represent a fundamental challenge to the state's monopoly on information. McKinnon can be seen as a kind of proto-whistleblower, an earlier, more naive archetype. He wasn't an insider with proof. He was an outsider with a deep-seated conviction that the system was hiding profound truths, and he used the tools of the new digital age to try and find them himself. His story embodies the impulse to bypass official channels entirely, a sentiment that has only grown stronger in the decades since. His case serves as a stark cautionary tale about the blurred lines of hacktivism. It forces us to ask difficult questions. Where do we draw the line between a righteous quest for truth and reckless cybercrime? Does a noble motive absolve you of the consequences, especially when those consequences, however unintentional, allegedly include disrupting military logistics and causing hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage? The staggering disparity between the potential sentence in the UK, likely a few months under the Computer Misuse Act, and the 70-year sentence sought by the US highlights a global lack of consensus on how to prosecute these new forms of digital trespass. The outcome, where one of the world's most powerful nations demanded life in prison and another decided the same acts warranted no prosecution at all, is a testament to this legal and ethical confusion. Ultimately, the story of Gary McKinnon leaves us with the same profound questions that drove him in the first place. How much secrecy is truly necessary for national security, and how much is simply a way for powerful institutions to avoid embarrassment and accountability? In a world where governments collect vast amounts of data on their citizens, what is the public's right to know in return? The fierce, decade-long pursuit of a single, non-malicious hacker suggests that for the US government, the embarrassment of having its shoddy security exposed was perhaps a greater crime than the hack itself. McKinnon's story is a foundational text for the digital age, a reminder that behind every screen, every network, and every firewall, there are human questions of curiosity, power, and the eternal search for truth. Conclusion. Gary McKinnon's story has no easy answers. He was a curious man who broke the law. He was a vulnerable individual who faced a terrifyingly powerful system. Was he a reckless criminal who endangered national security, or a misguided digital explorer on a quest for truth? Was the US government's reaction a proportionate response to a serious crime or a vindictive campaign to make an example of someone who exposed their weaknesses? The line between truth-seeking and cybercrime is finer and more complex than ever. What do you think? Where should that line be drawn? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in unpacking the complex stories that define our digital world, make sure you subscribe to GENSHIFT and hit that notification bell. We're just getting started.